It wasn't necessarily about choosing between David Cameron or Ed Miliband, albeit she has very clear views about which of those two she wants. So that clearly was the central part. Now, of course, the interesting thing, however, that also emerged out of, I think, of that speech was how the SNP, as they're now beginning to think of themselves as significant players at Westminster potentially, are beginning to widen their UK-wide policy agenda. So we had the repetition of things that we knew that they wanted: an end of austerity, so-called, getting rid of Trident, more powers for Scotland. But we also got pledges on constitutional reform for the UK as a whole. She's advanced very strongly in favour of changing the electoral system, even though the electoral system looks at the moment as though it might do the SNP a favour on May the 7th. Very strong calls for calling for the House of Lords. In fact, that got a much bigger cheer in the hall than actually did independents. But also on the minimum wage, on zero-hour contracts, on TTIP and the NHS and privatisation. So you can see how the SNP, as they look at the prospect of being in power at Westminster, have begun to develop much more in the way of UK-wide policies. But that said, there was also a reminder in the speech that in a little over 12 months' time, Nicola Sturgeon herself will have to face the voters and defend her position. And we got those announcements, therefore, particularly on extending educational maintenance allowances, something targeted at 16 to 19-year-olds, and 16 and 17-year-olds are going to get the vote in May 2016, and something also that, rather interesting, I think matches in some sense the pledge that Jim Murphy made 2 weeks ago, again to younger people, in this case money for those who didn't go to university. So I want to remind you here that eventually the SNP do have another battle to fight in 12 months' time, which is hanging on to power at Holyrood.
John, thank you very much for that immediate reaction. Now, Brian Taylor, our political editor, is standing by at the conference hall with the Deputy Leader of the SNP. Brian, it's over to you.
Thanks very much indeed. If you can hear me at all, the music throbbing there, and they're still giving that standing ovation. Stewart Hosie, you've come away from the turmoil to join me. What did you make of the speech?
Upbeat beyond belief. You heard the audience reaction to it. But the messaging was brilliant. Humble, hard work, delivery and real substance, an increase in the minimum wage, an extension of educational maintenance allowance, real ambition, real aspiration for Scotland. This response will go on for hours.
But you're saying humble, and she stressed that it had to be an offer of humility. That doesn't sound very humble in there. That sounds a bit hubristic to me.
The party are enthused by the message. They're probably going to go and knock the half of the doors in Glasgow tonight. This is campaign mode now. We are ready to start really delivering, not just for the SNP in terms of the election, but for Scotland in terms of substance.
Let me take you through some of the issues raised in the leader's speech. She said that Scotland's voice is best represented by the SNP at Westminster. Is that not rather presumptuous to make your party equate with Scotland's voice as a whole?
We're saying no to austerity. That chimes with the people of Scotland. They've suffered enough. Labour are wedded to 30 billion of more cuts. In that context, that message is absolutely right.
But Scotland's voice, Scotland as a whole, you're making yourself tantamount with Scotland as a whole.
The majority of the Scottish people want to see rid of Trident. Labour are wedded to Trident for the time being. We're speaking on behalf of the Scottish people on that issue as well.
Nicola Sturgeon also saying if you want a Labour government, she qualified a Labour government that acts in the interest of the Scottish people, you need to vote SNP to give them, I think she said, to give them guts. Again, is that not presumptuous? Surely if you want a Labour government, you vote Labour.
70% of the Scottish people actually want an SNP Labour arrangement. They want to see the Tories out in London, but they're desperate to have the policy position of the SNP. No to austerity, more powers for this nation, no to Trident, absolutely in tune with the Scottish people.
And what about this idea of making that offer not just in Scotland, but to the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, as she did?
Absolutely right, and I think that will be incredibly attractive. When we say we would vote against privatising the NHS in England to protect the Scottish NHS, the cheer goes up throughout the rest of the UK. In any event, we will vote to keep the NHS public, popular throughout the UK.
You said at one point that Labour had privatised the NHS. That's exaggerating it hugely, surely.
They introduced private market into the NHS. The Tories have gone further. They've opened up 49% of the NHS to privatisation. It's wrong in principle, and it's wrong because of the impact it has on Scotland. if we can stop further privatisation, it won't just be good for the NHS in Scotland, which it will, it'll be incredibly popular throughout the UK.
And the offer on the minimum wage, £8.70 over a period, I mean, that's just topping up Labour's offer, presumably, just going a bit further.
Well, we've calculated
70p further than them.
We've calculated 70p an hour, and we've calculated what's affordable. We think it's the right thing to do. When we talk about ending austerity, squeezing out inequality, it means those at the bottom must do better. And if that means a stronger and higher minimum wage, more encouragement with the living wage, then that's what you'll get from the SNP.
But your opponents would say that Scotland, with full fiscal autonomy, as you wish, would not be able to survive. They say they point to the Institute for Fiscal Studies figures suggesting a deficit of £7.6 billion, which Danny Alexander says over 5 years adds up to £40 billion.
And the same people ignore that George Osborne has a deficit of £75 billion this year and a debt of £1.5 trillion. This is politics, not economics. The numbers we've projected stack up. We can see an end to austerity while the deficit falls, debt falls as a share of GDP. It's win-win, and let's do away with ideological slash-and-burn approach to tackling the deficit.
Final one, Mr. Hosie, that was raised again, issues that arise from the speech. Abolish the House of Lords, got a huge round of applause there. What would you put in its place? Would there be a second chamber? What would you favour in its place?
Well, you can have a single chamber or you can have an elected second chamber. But to have 600 or 700 or 800 unelected peers on 300 quid a day to deliver precisely nothing is no longer credible in the modern world.
Stewart Hosie, thank you very much indeed for joining us, the Deputy Leader of the SNP, commenting on the Leader's speech. Back to the studio.
Brian, thank you very much. And Professor John Curtis is still with me here in the studio. John, just an interesting line from Nicola Sturgeon's speech. She said if there's a hung parliament, SNP MPs will vote to stop a Tory government even getting off the ground. So then she said, I call on Labour to match that pledge to make clear that if Labour and the SNP combined have more seats than the Tories, they will join forces with us in a vote of confidence to lock David Cameron out of Downing Street. What will Labour say to that?
Well, I think it's perhaps in some sense, in terms of political wheeling and dealing, the most interesting point in the whole speech. We'll remember, of course, over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Labour Party across the UK as a whole was put under intense pressure by the Conservative Party to rule out the prospect of a coalition with the SNP. And eventually, indeed, Ed Miliband did that, although he's kept open the possibility that there'll be some confidence supply arrangement or some other kind of weaker understanding, which is why the SNP still think they've got a chance influencing Labour. Now we see the SNP trying to turn the tables on Ed Miliband and say, well, OK, you've ruled out doing a coalition with us. Are you equally willing to rule out being willing to allow David Cameron to remain in office? In other words, we've made it clear that irrespective of the outcome, if indeed there's a chance of voting against the Conservatives and stopping them forming a government, then we will take that opportunity. Will you match us? And of course, the aim of this, of course, is to try to undermine Labour's argument north of the border that actually if the Conservatives have more seats than Labour, but less than overall majority, the Tories are still likely to form the next government. Now, it will be interesting to see how far the SNP pursue this, but in a sense, one of the things that's happened in this election is that both Labour and the Conservatives are finding themselves sucked into what arguments about what will you do if you don't get 326 seats. Before this election, they've always responded to these kind of questions by saying, oh, look, but that's not going to happen. We're fighting for a majority. Both of them have increasingly found themselves accepting the premise that they may not get 326. And given that Mr Miliband's already accepted the premise and said, well, yes, I wouldn't have a coalition with the SNP, it will be difficult for him actually not to answer Nicola Sturgeon's question and say, yes, I will guarantee that I will vote against an attempt to form a minority Conservative government.
OK, John, thank you very much. Let's head back once again to Brian at the conference. He's got some guests with him just now. Brian.
Guests with me indeed. Thanks very much indeed for handing back to the hall. It's a bit less noisy than it was earlier, but hey, it was good fun as well. 3 members who were listening to the speech there. Clay McLean, I gather you joined the party on referendum day.
Yes.
Why? What suddenly occurred to you then that hadn't before?
Stayed fairly quiet in the run-up to the referendum. But I'd gone back home to Glasgow, my student in Dundee, just before the referendum, and I'd gone out just a few days before, seen the energy, seen the enthusiasm, saw the vision, and went back home that night on the 17th the day before and joined up the SNP.
The membership's gone from 20,000 to, I think it was 102,000.
Yes, it's incredible.
And bits. You're one of those, but it was that energising effect of the referendum, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. We have people who actually stand up for what we believe in Scotland's future, rather than the same old.
What did you make of the speech?
I thought it was incredible. I thought she addressed everything that needed to be spoken about, and I'm glad she dispelled some of the myths of people telling you if you vote for this person you'll get this person. She said loud and clear, vote for who you want and you'll get who you want.
Alan Cameron, what did you make of the speech?
Oh, I thought it was a wonderful... it's probably the best political speech I have ever heard. And You've
heard a few, I imagine,
I've heard a few, and I've heard very, very good ones. But everything she said was pointed and focused. And I thought what came across too was the way she said that we're going to support you with humility. It's you we're appealing to. We're not the people, it's you. You are the important people. I thought that was very important.
Maggie McCabe, your verdict on the speech, please.
I thought the speech was absolutely wonderful. I've seen Nicola speak before, and she speaks with such conviction and such honesty, and she can connect to the people who she speaks to. And she makes her points clear and coherent, so I really enjoyed it.
Let me ask each of you the same question. Is it not slightly presumptuous of a party that wishes to end the United Kingdom as presently constituted to be seeking to determine the governance of the United Kingdom? You first, Maggie.
Well, the fact that we are part of the United Kingdom as of just now means that we should at least have a say in its affairs. We might as well make the best of the situation that we are in.
Alan, what do you make?
Do you know what the Westminster politicians didn't understand about the independence referendum? The subculture was about changing the way that we were governed. It was about equality. Now, they have never picked that up. And that's still what Nicola was talking about today. It's about the equality throughout the United Kingdom she was talking about.
Do you think that's reasonable? You could make an offer to the people of England. Surely they're capable of deciding their own electoral choices and deciding their own politics.
You would think so, but at the moment, if the polls go the way they are in England, there would be a hung parliament, there would be no decision. So hopefully we in Scotland, as currently part of the UK, could help support a government that would be progressive and for the best of the people of not just Scotland but all the UK.
You won't deal with the Tories, and the Labour Party don't seem to want to touch you.
Well, that's the Labour Party's prerogative. If they want to join up with a progressive party which will do the best for the people, we're there, we're ready, we're waiting to join them.
What about the argument, Alan, that if Nicola Sturgeon says if you want a Labour government of a certain type, you need the SNP to give them backbone.
Backbone and guts.
Surely, it's backbone and guts. She said, surely if you want a Labour government, you vote Labour.
Well,